So I'm going to chat a little bit about how Clearbit is building a single view of our customers. It's through a bunch of tools, DBT, I'll be chatting about Census, and I'll be walking you through some of the models that we've built. So I'm about 2 years into my lifetime here at Clearbit. So I started my career sort of on the marketing, the creative side of the world. So email campaigns, advertising, realized I wasn't so great at it and spent most of my time in the numbers and moved into creative operations analytics, which basically was just a way to get ROI for the product that I was working at the time called Concept Share. Then moved on to Customer IO, which I'm actually going to be talking about a little bit here because we use it at Clearbit, and then moved over to Clearbit. And in these roles, I've sort of stayed on the marketing side, which I've found, just given my experience in the marketing world and kind of my love for analytics, it's worked well because no one needs to explain why they're doing what they're doing. It just, I get the value of all the campaigns that marketing's doing, and it doesn't need to be sold to me. So when I started 2 years at Clearbit, there was no one in the data world. So I was the first data hire. And Clearbit, for those of you that aren't familiar, we're a data company. We have a whole bunch of products: enrichment, reveal, prospector, and our latest one is Clearbit advertising. And essentially what we do is we take a piece of data and we return data to make that information more powerful. So whether it's enrichment, you can, give us an email and we'll return all of the company stats, the employment stats, so that you can do better segmentation, better sales prospecting from that. So given that there were a whole bunch of different databases, a whole bunch of different sources, people lived, or information lived in a whole bunch of different places. And we had no idea how many users we had in our world, how many companies we had in our world. And Claire's smiling because she came in day one to help me with this. And there was, we couldn't even tell you how much we had or someone paid us last year. So, our revenue reporting was partly in Stripe, partly in a custom built billing platform. And so the first thing I did day 2 was called Fishtown, and we, consolidated our user table of our Gmail Connect. So we have kind of a Gmail plugin, a Google Chrome plugin. We have a Salesforce Lite plugin. We have all of our different products. And so we first made a consolidated table of all of our users. And then I'm actually going to go to the first slide because here was the first problem we had to solve. We had no reporting. And so again, like I said, we had revenue. No one could tell me any of that data. The users across, we had no idea how many actual companies we had in our database, who was there, if anybody had ever used one of our free products, and the sales was talking to them, they were talking to them like they were brand new. And one of the other biggest problems we had was we had no idea where people were coming from. So we were not able to say that this campaign was better than this campaign. All of it was done in Excel or through a third-party kind of consulting firm. So brought in DBT. Claire single-handedly built out our revenue reporting model. So I don't want to take credit for that, but I am happy to show that at the end if anybody wants to take a look for that. But the model that I do want to talk about really specifically with everyone here is our attribution, because I think that that's a common problem that a lot of analysts are trying to solve. And it's getting that attribution on the reporting level and then taking it all the way and making it actionable. So we were able to build out our attribution using a whole bunch of different tools. So we collect our data on segment. We have visits from people on our webpage. We have people signing up on Google Connect, our Facebook. We basically have a whole bunch of things where people are engaging with us, and we brought them all through segment, brought them all through Redshift. And so we solved that with the DBT side, and we're able to bring in all of the different events. And I'll just actually, did we lose that? Oh, here we go. So we were able to build out this attribution model here, where we were able to take blog signups, book subscriptions, Connect signups, contact requests, everything that anyone had done. And we're able to use DBT to make individual models for each one of those, join them together, and create this massive attribution touchpoint model where we could tell John Smith, the first time he ever came to us was in 2017. He came to us via Connect. He came to us via Facebook ad. 2 days later, he visited this page. 3 days later, he attended a webinar. 4 years later, which actually isn't that, so let's just say 2 years later, he came back and he signed up for the product. And so we're able to track their history all through the time, which previously without DBT, we would have to have downloaded all of those reports. We would have had to have then joined them in an Excel doc, and would have had no idea how to do individual analysis of each person. So DBT allowed us to join all of these different disparate sources together of all of the things people could do, create individual events, and then join it as one singular table, which we were able to get into Salesforce. So we were able to get this table into Salesforce. And as I said, in 2019, this person signed up for Connect, then they visited our homepage, then they opened an email, then they opened another email. As you can see, it kind of clicks all through. And we actually were able to tag what was the converting touch to that lead. So what was the action that brought them into our world as a lead? What was the action that brought them into our world as an MQL? And what was the action that brought them into our world as a SQL? So able to track their entire journey. So then our demand team, our growth team can go back and say, this action itself is the highest generator of MQLs. This action is the highest generator of leads. And it's actually, when they come through Facebook paid social, that's the highest volume. So we need to do more of that. So that was what our team was able to do without me ever having to help them build one single report. They just accessed it through these attribution touch points. Most people think that this is a very simple basic model, and they don't see all the work behind it, which is the beauty of DBT. Is it takes all of that, turns it into this wonderful little table that they just go select star from attribution touch points, and no idea that there are 75 tables behind it that are powering that table. And so what you may be asking is, how did we get it from DBT into Salesforce? And that's one where I spent maybe 4 or 5 days Googling, how do you get Redshift data from DBT into any other tool? Because there was nothing when I was looking for it that could do it in the way that we needed. There was nothing that took all of this transformed data that I was very proud of, but nobody else in the company had any idea existed, because, I write the mode query, they look at the mode report, they just access the data on the user interface side. They don't tend to go in and dig in deep into the data. So in that search, I was able to find Census. So our data pipeline, as I kind of skimmed over this quickly before, goes from segment, Redshift. We transform the data on the DBT side. All of that data lived in mode and people were accessing it, but a lot of our sales team wasn't accessing this data at all because they didn't touch mode. Our sales leaders just weren't interested in going into the mode reports. And so what I wanted to do was put the data where the teams live, because I wasn't interested in trying to get them to learn a new tool. I was interested in trying to get them the information they needed to do their job faster. And so Census was able to take these models and push them into tools like Salesforce, push them into tools like Customer.io. And actually, our first requirement was Customer.io, because given the fact that I used to work there, this is a little embarrassing, but we were over emailing people. We had so many duplicates inside of our Customer.io instance because our segment events were firing. We had, sometimes the user ID was the email, sometimes the user ID was the actual user ID, sometimes it was some combo of something else. And so one email address could live in our Customer.io instance 4 to 5 times. And when we sent out an email, they got the email 5 times. So that was sort of the first driving factor to why we needed to use DBT's deduping mechanisms, the testing mechanism, have a really clean database of users, and then put them into our email marketing tool to kind of not look so dumb. In the simplest words, that's the biggest benefit that we had, is we were able to send it to the right people. We've had additional benefits afterwards, but that was the initial kind of pain we were feeling. And so what we've done with our Census integration with DBT is we've actually been able to create computed fields that we can email based on. So one of the examples that we use is we can compute the changes in usage month over month, week over week, day over day, however we want to do that. So we just do month over month, and we can send out email alerts based on their changes in their overall usage. And this means that our lifecycle marketer is enabled to do whatever he wants to do. So any campaign he dreams of doing, we no longer have to bug the engineering team and say like, hey, can you push this field? Can you create this field? Can you read this field? It's like, hey, Julie, can you write like 2 lines of code? And can you create this field so that we can send out emails that are super targeted, super personalized, and we can actually get our customers the information that's useful to them versus let's work with what we have. It's like, what should we have? And that's really helped our team become super powerful. I don't know if there's any questions, but I'm going to keep going until I hear someone interrupt me. So this wasn't without a lot of pain and a lot of lessons learned. I tried to boil the ocean initially with getting our data actionable, because one of the things was dbt lets you have access to everything, lets you build these models to everything. And I wanted to put everything into our customer IO instance. And I wanted to take all of this work that we'd done on the reporting side and make it instantly available in all of the tools for everyone. That obviously is, once you put it into production, you have way more data and way more eyes looking at it. And there wasn't enough documentation. There wasn't enough clarity around it. So it was basically throwing a water hose at people that had no idea what any of this data was. Also, we struggled with Redshift quite a bit. We tried to turn, taking all of this data, getting it to rebuild on kind of an every 15-minute basis at first, and trying to make our email marketing platform as real time as possible. I don't know if any of you have had experience with Redshift and the pain that it can cause, but we basically couldn't report for days at a time. It sort of stopped all of our work. We had to do a lot of maintenance work. So we put quite a big load on this system. And one of the other pieces is that I have now injected myself into kind of the critical path of communications with customers, interactions with customers, whereas on the reporting side, you are there, you're reporting numbers, you're communicating internally, and you're discussing next steps on an internal side. When you start injecting your data into the communications with customers, when an email misfires or a data point is missing or whatnot, you can imagine when the data is wrong, it no longer just impacts that one individual report, it impacts the chain of all of those communications. So making the data useful and actionable means that you are now part of that. When ops breaks, you are one of the chains in the ops, the marketing and sales ops that needs to get pulled into those troubleshooting meetings.
Julie, just really quickly, there's some questions in the chat around Redshift performance. Nolan, are you free to interject and ask your question, which I think is one that everyone loves to hear the answer for?
Yeah, sure. So just curious, maybe specifically what some of the performance problems were and whether you just had to relax expectations around the ETL and timeliness of data, or whether there were also some technical solutions that you were able to employ to improve the performance issues.
Yeah, so one of the things we had was mode reports were running on a 15-minute basis. Almost all of our mode reports, people would create them in their personal folder and just run them, and that starts to queue up. So we went through and did a cleanup of our mode reports, also optimized some of our dbt tables because there was a lot of sloppy code, a lot of messy, a lot of really expensive queries that we were creating. So it was going through auditing that. We also had our sysops team. What did they do? Our sysops team did a little maintenance on it. I'm blanking now. They did a refresh of some sort, and that seemed to clean it up the best. We also reduced the frequency of all of our dbt builds. So we were building with some of these email marketing tables every 15 minutes. We reduced that to just every 4 hours, and that had a dramatic effect. So it was less real-time data, meant faster kind of ad hoc queries. We also started scheduling different types of users, priority. So any ad hoc queries got priority over scheduled queries, which meant that if you were coming in to ask it a question, you weren't feeling that immediate pain of it's slow. It would be the scheduled queries that would get pushed back to them. Cool. So I'm going to just chat about what's next, because what I'm really happy with is we solve the reporting side. It's an ongoing, continuous problem that as new data comes in, we need to find new ways to report on it, but we have a system in place that works. We also have set up a system in place where data to our Salesforce and and customer IO is essentially just writing a new line of code for new fields we want to push through. So we have the system in place that makes that work. You know, it to this point, if there's a new data point that we need to aggregate, it's a 15-minute job. With QA, it's 30 minutes. So it's making like very quick to get new data to the team so that it's useful. What we're trying to do now is we're trying to monetize this data, because I think a lot of the times, at least me personally, I felt like a bit of overhead. I want to be able to contribute to the dollars that we're bringing in and not just necessarily measure those dollars. And this is where we're going to build out DBT plus Census plus Clearbit advertising, because our existing, this is one of our products, not really a pitch. I just want, this is, our goal is to take all of these data points and tables and use them in a way that can create audiences that we can target to in Facebook and Google. So right now we're using a mismatch of crummy data inside of our Clearbit advertising. We can't really tell who's paid, who hasn't paid. And so when we send out these audiences to Facebook, it's a bigger net than we want to be casting. And so obviously with advertising, it's being as efficient with your dollars and having the best audiences possible. So by taking DBT, getting the exact list of people, flagging them as we want, creating the segments inside Clearbit advertising, we're able to target exactly who we want to do, exactly who we want to market to. And then we're able to push those out to Google Ad and Facebook, and we're able to create ads for that group of people and lookalike audiences as well. So that's upcoming. That's the next project. And hopefully I'll have good success stories. If not, I'll have lots of learnings from what we did right and what we did wrong. And that's it.
Cool. Amazing. Thank you so much. So pretty much we've got tons of time for questions, which is a good spot to be in. With the Redshift, the comments on Redshift, I was messaging Jeremy's on this call, and he was also working with Clearbit with me at one point, and I was like, oh, Redshift. I think that was the last time I worked using Redshift instead of Snowflake. And
yeah, we had a project to switch over to Snowflake, and then obviously March, 13th hit, and so we had to put that on pause.
Yeah. Fair enough. Cool. So there's a question in the chat from Akshay. I don't know if I got that pronunciation correct. Are you able to ask that question out loud if you're on the call?
Totally am, yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, I'm Akshay. I work at Indigo Agriculture, or Indigo Ag, I guess for short, up in Boston. And we're brand new to just starting to look at DBT. So we joined hoping to learn some things, and we definitely have. And we were just trying to figure out, was this all built using DBT Cloud, or the CLI tool plus your own tooling to orchestrate things?
Yeah, so I can kind of show you our world. We weren't, when we started DBT Cloud, I don't believe that the UI was built just yet.
No, it was still just a scheduler at that point.
Yes, yeah. So I just use a text editor with GitHub and push it through to, it's now called DBT Cloud, but it builds it, tests it, and runs it. So we just use a combo of all the tools. I think that's how it used to be standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So developing using a code editor and the CLI, and then running in production using DBT Cloud.
Exactly.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. Ali.
Hi. Yeah, I was really interested in how you were sending metrics to the email marketing tool. You mentioned that you kind of had a moment where you were sending everything and it was too much information for people and they weren't sure what to do with it. And then it seemed like you got it down to something that was really usable and actionable for that team. I know you have a marketing background, so maybe you had a little bit of instinct to provide to that, but I'm wondering if you had any recommendations on how to have that conversation or get to a place where people are able to use the metrics that you're putting out.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it was anything's possible. So the marketing team said yes, 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 yes to all of these metrics, and then never really saw a use case for them. And I think if I was to do this again, I would talk through the campaigns that they want to use. What are the metrics that would, or the data points or the attributes that would be helpful to make that campaign more valuable? And then also let them know what else is available and then get them to tell me how they'd use it versus just, yeah, that's cool. The other thing was we whitelist all of our metrics, or all of our attributes. So given the way that you can just have everything in and then people aren't sure which attributes to use, which ones are still valid, I prefer that method. It does mean that you do stay a part of the process for longer though. It also means that when new data points are created, that you do have to get involved. So for example, if they're creating a new attribute and are identifying, the way that segment and customer IO work is that every new attribute that gets created or trait that gets created just gets pushed right into customer IO. The reason it didn't work for us was all the duplications, and sometimes people just would randomly create dev traits if we try and use them in campaigns and they weren't real and all of that. But you do have to write that extra line of code and push it through and send it through segment. And there are steps involved. I wouldn't change the way we do it, having done it both ways. It just means that they need to be trained to ask you for data points and not gripe when there's not a data point. It's like, I probably have it, is the thing I say to them. It's like, I probably have the data point you need. Make sure you ask me before you try and use something else. Like, it's probably in the system. I just haven't surfaced it.
That's so useful. We also have segment, and I have this 400 column user table from them that is just a bear to use. So I'm really interested in how you changed that.
Yeah, we went from like 1,000 traits to there's maybe like 150. We do have to do a cleanup. I actually have that on my calendar this week. We do have to go back and clean up every once in a while because we use one and then we're like, oh, we don't need it, but much cleaner and easier to use.
There's a question from Jeremy, who I think is potentially eating lunch. I don't know who's, oh, there you are. Hi, Jeremy.
I just finished. Thank you. I appreciate the rescue though. That was great, Julie. Long time no see.
Hi, Jeremy.
I'm curious how you framed the switch from the every 15-minute update to the every 4-hour update to your stakeholders who maybe don't appreciate all the technical implementation details.
Yeah. So there was a lot of steps involved in that. And this is where Census sort of bailed us out big time, was we can take the events. So we were able to ingest our segment events live into Census, and we were able to clean up the data slightly. So if, there was duplication or there was fields that we didn't want, I could clean up the event inside of Census because it has its own SQL editor. And then I could send it into Customer IO in real time, because there are data points that we need in real time that just nobody would have tolerated not having them in real time. So I was able to extract, okay, what do we need in real time and what is not that interesting and you're probably not going to need for 6 weeks or whatnot. And so that was sort of the conversation I had with the marketing teams. Like, you need obviously first name, last name, and then all job title, a whole bunch of things that we do segmentation on for the very first email, throw that in on the live event. And there was, a lot of coalescing on fields because some were old, some were new. Anyways, but we were able to clean it up before we pushed it into Customer IO. And the conversation was really easy with the team that way, because I could say, you have the fields you need in real time and the rest will come in 4 hours, no worries. And that's all I had to say. And they're pretty cool with it.
Boris, hello. Hi. Do you want to jump in with your question?
There we go. All right, I can remember how to use Zoom. Hey, Julie, one of the things you mentioned is when the data is live and affecting real emails and downstream emails and all that stuff. Now you're in the hot seat. You're a link in the chain, as you said. What did you have to change about your process then because of that? Like, whoa.
Yeah, so this is where the DBT test lets me sleep at night. But I set up a lot of rules with DBT test to make sure there was no duplication, making sure that there was a lot of fields that were populated that needed to be populated. And so I get the email if something's breaking and I know immediately. A little bit more QA. So being that I'm no longer the only real stakeholder or person involved in the reporting. If I got something wrong in reporting before, I'd be like, oh, sorry, let me just fix that SQL query. Oops, nothing's broken, right? Now that's not so cute. So there does need to be a process where I check it inside of a report. We do a quick little making sure that it makes sense, the numbers make sense, that there's this many people that have that attribute. I check it with the team that's going to use it, and then we go live. So more collaboration than before.
I have a question, I guess, for Julie and for Boris as well as CEO of Census. I think there's there's an interesting ideological difference between approaches to, I guess, having data, building models as a data team and getting them in the hands of your stakeholders. And on one end, you could be like, everyone has to come to the data warehouse. That's where it is. And that's that's where I can control the surface area. And maybe the interface to that is Mode or Looker or whatever it is, but you've got a lot of control. And maybe people learn to use that tool and come in and you might embed a Mode report somewhere else and all those sorts of things. So there's sort of that way of doing it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's I'm going to push data everywhere out of my warehouse, which I think technologically wasn't really an option, an easy option until recently. And you could push it out to Salesforce and to Customer IO and, I can't even think, Twilio and all these other APIs that consume data as well. And I think there's a different set of challenges of, if you're pushing data from your warehouse back out into the hand of stakeholders, how do you manage sort of the impact of that when it's out of your warehouse, even though there's a very good thing of meeting your stakeholders and the tools that they use. So I'm curious, how do you find a balance between the two? Is it that you sort of have one or two models that you endorse and share with some tools but not everything, or do you just sort of feel it out how it as you go?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and not one that I think I've solved yet. So we do all of the above. We embed Mode reports. We have Mode reports. We have kind of a Clearbit home screen where there's links to our main reports that we've built. Our CS and sales team are logging into Mode daily, and they may not even know it. I think the way that I've tried to solve it is the biggest problems that we've had in terms of data, and it was attribution for me. We couldn't seem to solve it in any other way other than every time I would present a report, there was 5 more questions that they had, and that would mean building another report. Oh, I want to see it this way. Oh, I want to see it this way. Oh, I want to see it this way. And that started to one of our attribution reports, because I built in all of this dynamic filtering ability, took so long and crashed our Redshift. So I thought, how do we get the team to engage with this data? And that was sort of solving the one specific problem. And that's how I thought of Census, Census and kind of the way that we connect through is it's a specific tables that I whitelist in, and data points that are going to be needed on a daily basis are going to answer questions in ways that are not kind of linear. This is how you answer this question. It's no, this data point, you can answer it this way. You can segment it this way. You can run it in a whole bunch of different scenarios. So that's kind of how I thought about what data I push to Salesforce. And then the customer IO side is just the cleanest database set that we have. That's just there's no real logic to it. It's just what data is clean can I send to them?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, Claire, if you could bring everyone to your world, it'd be great, right? It really would be if you could always just bring people exactly to your, corner of the universe. It's just been our experience. You're not gonna be able to send an automated email off of, from the warehouse. That's not a thing yet. Although someday maybe. And so I think there's this tension between kind of control and correctness, right? You want everyone in the world to have the right data about your users, and you are the best able to provide that answer. But you want to have the control on the other side to send the emails when they want to send emails and do the report that they want to do in the tool that they want to do. And I think what I've seen that's actually where this hits a really hilarious intersection is aggregation, right? So Julie mentioned the marketing team wants to figure out which metrics are useful. And Ali, you asked, how do you go from 400 down to, the 100? And it goes even further than that, I find, where you say, well, fine, I'll give you just the models that are clean and you can kind of go to town. But then people don't even understand exactly the right way to aggregate across an account versus a user. And so they'll aggregate incorrectly. So weirdly, you're actually if you give them too much control, they'll use it wrong. So there's definitely, like, I think we're still in the realm of, it's art of trying to figure out what is the right white label to expose or allow list, of like, here is the users and the metrics that we are like fully blessed. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's a super interesting discussion, because I think, Boris, we had a conversation, I think it was 6 months ago, but it feels
feels like it was a lifetime ago now.
Yeah. And I think we've always been so on the side of, like, there needs to be one endorsed thing, and it lives in your warehouse, and people have to come to your playground to play with those things. And then this is a very different approach to it. So it's really cool that, like, you can have both. We'll find a balance.
Yeah. I think, by the way, we're all, I think in this room, probably in deep agreement that there should only be one source of truth, and it should be in your warehouse.
and then we can just federate it out to.
Yeah, I think it's just about how do you federate it, and that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Cool. A lot of questions.
Dennis, Drizzly, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for the presentation. Just kind of curious, since you have the complete circle of sending data to Census and then Census data coming back into the warehouse, and kind of using your warehouse both as a warehouse and kind of like an ingestion pipeline to some degree. So I was just kind of wondering how you test all this, especially given some of the limitations of Redshift.
I wish I had a really great answer to this. The testing is very much like ad hoc. So every new change, depending on the type of change, I will test it. Like if I'm making a change for customer IO, I will run the DBT test, make sure that there's no dupes, and then I will cross-reference all of those against like our Salesforce instance. There's no testing process that's strict for every single change that I make, probably because I'm a team of one and no one else really needs to kind of check on it. So yeah, I don't know if, Boris, you have any on the Census testing side, but for us, I mean, I heavily rely on setting up my DBT test to do 95% of my thinking for me. And then I use schema parameters in mode where I swap to my DBT, and I check to make sure that the report looks accurate before I push it live. Yeah.
I mean, I would only add, I think if you think of the tiers of where your testing is, I think there's the testing that ideally you want to spend your time on, which is bespoke to you, which is, what is the correct shape of our data and what is meaningful to us. And I think that's where DBT is the right tool for you here. And then I think of, the ways in which we help is only in terms of, you don't want to think about, here's where things get really crappy, is when you have to think about customer IO and Salesforce and their limitations of how they like data. And so we try to handle that for you, which is really just a hassle that shouldn't be in your brain. It's really useless knowledge that they have weird external ID rules and uniqueness rules. And so I think, there's a layer where I think systems should help you and just answer those questions as much as they can for you. So it's like pre-flight checks type things that we can do. And I think the rest is, I hate to say it, it's still a little bit of art versus science around where what you should test for in a way that's performant. I feel like that stuff's getting just more interesting every month the past year or two.
Cool. Nolan, I don't know if you're able to ask a question.
Sure.
There you are. Hi.
I was just curious around the kind of flexibility, and Boris, what you were just talking about sounds like it explains a little bit in terms of not having to deal with some of the implementation details on, say, the Salesforce side of the world. But I'm curious, if there was an existing object, can you update specific fields on that object? Are you always creating custom objects, or kind of how does that work a little under the hood?
Right. No, I think we've put ourselves through the hell of supporting everything. So the short answer is yes. But yeah, so a tool like ours, the idea is your business operations team or your sales team or your success team or your support team or your marketing team, they want to use their tool in their way. And our goal is to help you kind of shoehorn the correct data into that. And so we can update existing objects. We can say upsert objects. We can say append only things if there's a couple weird scenarios like that. I think what we find is you have to sometimes teach the the other side, right? Let's call it the Salesforce side or the customer IO side. Something that Julie is very good at doing on her own because she's lived both worlds. But you have to sometimes say like, look, Census, a tool like ours can push data in, like in all the configurations. But the real problem occurs when you get something like Salesforce only supports a many-to-one relationship on something, and you have a many-to-many. And that is how the data is. And you're like, that is the correct shape of the data. And so you have to, you could try pushing it into Salesforce, and we will just kind of tell you like, look, this is why it's all going to go wrong, but you're not stopped from doing that. And I think there is like where you have to have the 5 whys conversation with the team. And usually what ends up happening is you can either try to re-customize all of Salesforce because it's a full, programmable interface, or you distill, right? You do, I think the work that this team, this kind of people, this crowd is uniquely good at of like distilling down to a one-to-many for this destination, right? And so I think of that as like last mile transformations, and Julie has a lot of those things where it's for this destination, the data needs to be kind of modified, and then and then the rest, we take care of the rest.
Cool. Ali.
I have a sort of specific question. I'm wondering, we have Segment as well, and we, in addition to having a warehouse where some of that data goes, we also send it to Amplitude and Mixpanel. And there's like this tension between how the identifiers work in those tools and the timing of that data with the events, and how we might aggregate and generate those metrics in sort of more of a 4-hour time frame versus the kind of near real time that appears in Amplitude. And so I don't know if this is too specific, feel free to deflect until later, but we've had a real hard time reconciling those two tools because the user properties that we're able to show directly from the segment identifiers are wrong, but you can't fix them and keep the alignment with events. So we end up, even if we went through and kind of cleaned everything up in the warehouse and fixed it for email campaigns, our cohorts are different. I'm wondering if that's something that you maybe have dealt with and have any tips on.
I have been looking at Amplitude recently, actually. Okay, well, I'll give you the latest update. So like Amplitude and tools like it are these like write once systems, right? They're really almost exclusively designed for write once. And so I exactly understand this problem, right? It's really frustrating that, you have a user stream of events and then you figured out like something about the user because you've processed the data in the warehouse, and now you want to have all the rest of the timeline be tied to that knowledge, and you can't do it. And I've been talking to the Amplitude team a lot to try to get them to, enable this, because that would make we've had people ask us this, right? And we're like, we want to make this work. The short answer I can give you for right now is there are only 2 moves, and they're not great. One move, and this is specific to Amplitude, but I think it gives you a sense of how all these systems work, because they're really at the core, like time series DBs work the same way here. One is that you're not going to like, which is you effectively create new synthetic events that attach the properties to them, right? So you basically create a shadow event of the real event from the warehouse, and you attach all the data to it, and then you create kind of like a shadow timeline that you insert into Amplitude, because you can insert into the past, right? So that's one approach. And then the other approach is to use their cohorts product, which actually does work the way you want it to work. So that would be the easy solution is to set up cohorts and then use a tool like Census to sync your user properties that happen at any given point into cohorts. And then that, of course, I'm pretty sure you have to buy that. It's extra. But that kind of works the correct way relative to your understanding of your users. Otherwise, the third option is to rebuild your Amplitude every time, which you don't want to do. Like a full replay, which obviously that doesn't sound fun.
No.
Yeah. Or just use mode and start getting rid of Amplitude slowly but surely, which is I think what most people end up doing is they slowly move this BI capability out because you've reached the point where it doesn't give you the flexibility, right? I wish it weren't like that, but yeah.
Yeah. I think you maybe
it's funny you bring this up. We were literally on this just Friday. Very fresh.
I saw Chris just gave the clap emoji then. I feel like he's been burned by Amplitude. My hot take, I think Amplitude does do things that's there are things to do in Amplitude that you shouldn't do in a BI tool.
Sure.
Dynamic, flow analysis, as in this person started here, how do they end up there? so hard to do in SQL. You can't express it in a, like, my rule of thumb is like, if you can put on a bar chart, mode, looker, periscope, whatever it is. If you can't.
Time series DBs have, time series have absolutely like a huge value. No, I agree with you. It's just more like people hit these problems and then they're stuck.
Yeah.
And
it's when the person starts to try to use, in my experience, it was when people were trying to use Amplitude to like do revenue reporting and weird things, like get real, like product conversion metrics. And it's like, well, we know like this is the definition for product conversion, so we can put that in a looker instead. Got some nods from Nolan, so thank you.
I know I didn't go into any of the tools, but if anyone's curious to see like how any of these things are integrated or set up, or if like you're curious about Customer.io or Salesforce or Census or any of those, just also happy to share my screen more.
I'm curious about the decision between using like Stitch and Segment, as it seems like a syncing tool, like kind of using the ETL parts of that, and how you decided to have both or between the two.
Yeah, so I would say 90% of our data comes from Segment. Stitch is a lot of custom built, where we'll scrape sites and then we'll send it to a webhook and push it in to our Redshift that way, or we'll use Google Sheets to create tables or for targets. So Stitch is really only used for things that just you would be hacking Segment to make it work. Yeah.
I'm gonna jump in there and say like kind of the counter argument to that as well. I think Segment makes a ton of sense for like Clearbit's data, where it is a lot of like, this person did this thing, like it's a lot of events. So Segment in itself is sort of like, I mean, at its core, it's 3 different products. It's an event tracking system. It's a like sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but like a data federation system, as in like it receives the events and then says, send it to S3, send it to Redshift, send it to this other API. And the third way that it's kind of used is like an ETL service for like other APIs. And I think that third way is like the worst way that you can use it, as in like if you're trying to use it to sync Stripe data, it's just not the best way to do it. Or if you're trying to use it to sync like Zendesk data, where like, you know, clicks and page views and things like that, where it's, you know, this is a thing that happened and gets sent on, as opposed to relational databases that get expressed in when you hit an API and get the results back. I think Stitch is really good for those sorts of things. So I would say like we generally use 2 different ETL processes depending on the like general type of the data, whether it's an API that we're hitting and getting the results back from, or whether it's like a webhook that's receiving events from, you know, real-time events happening. I don't know if that makes sense.
I would +1 that, Claire. Like I think of Segment is born as an event. The word you're looking for is like a multiplexer. And so that's that's what it's good at. And core data ingestion is a very different problem.
Yeah. And I think someone asked this the other day in DBT Slack. They were like, oh, I'm using Segment to sync HubSpot and I'm missing like 60% of my customers. And I'm like, I just don't even, like, I'm not surprised, and I don't even know how to fix that other than to say like, it's not the right use case for it. It's just sort of one of those things where someone's like, I have this tool Segment, I'm paying a lot of money for it, I want it to be able to do everything. So they've sort of tried to make it do it, but limited.
Bad luck with Segment and HubSpot, which is weird given that they're, you know, should be very sympathetic to each other.
It may not have been HubSpot. It might have, I think it was something else, but it might have been HubSpot. But it was, yeah, they were like, I just don't know where my customers are. And I'm like, I don't know either. So Julie, you were saying before you're happy to like jump back into screen sharing mode and give anyone a tour of anything. So I'm curious, like, does anyone on the call have a part of this sort of pipeline that they want to get a quick tour of?
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think Census is the one that may not be visually as obvious. I know that when I talked to Boris about it, I was like, cool, yeah, that makes sense. What does it look like? So I'm happy to show our Census. So this is sort of our UI, and what we do, I have a lot of attributes. Some of these are not set up. So I started a CIO, which is Customer IO, and our Salesforce.com. And what we've done, actually, this is the most recent one that we've done. So we've essentially created, sometimes I don't actually use DBT models. I'll build it just inside of Census here. And our sales team and our marketing team wanted to get a sense of, has this person ever been in our world before? Like, has this person come into our world? So we were able to take a look at all of our paid customers, take a look at that domain, and we were able to come up with an attribute that's possible champion. And so did all of the coding, all of the model building here. I'm trying to see what are interesting. Their CIO, this is our quota. I think I showed you the example in our email where we create a percentage of the quota hit. So we take a look at, their billing, and then we take this is all kind of custom to us, but basically at the end of it, we come down and we have like, what was their usage? And we send that usage, whether it's 0%, 85%, 90%, and we send that data point into Customer IO, and then we send out the emails based on that. And so all of these models, it's basically just a blank SQL editor, so you can do as you please. I know Boris has some new features, so I can let him talk about that in a sec. But then we go into our syncs. So this is our attribution touchpoint custom object where we sync it to Salesforce, and it does a lot of the logic for us. So let me just go into, actually, this is one of my favorite things, Boris, by the way, that you created recently. I am now accountable, and I know when I'm the one that made the mistake, I can check my log, which is super helpful. So we come in here and we just map the fields. So these are our Salesforce fields, and these are the fields that I created inside the model, and it creates the relationship. So it ties it to a specific object, custom object. This is actually, for us, this is creating lookup fields. So we have our custom attribution touchpoint object inside of Salesforce, and then if there's a lead ID, it links it to that lead, so then it appears on the lead record, and if it's an opportunity, it appears on the opportunity record, and so it has all of the data points. Are there any questions about that one? How do the Salesforce side fields come to exist in the first? Oh, maybe Boris can talk about that technically, but this is how the non-technical person checks them out. They just exist here, and I find it inside of Salesforce. So they have to first exist in Salesforce. So if you're creating a new field, you have to first create it inside of Salesforce and then come back here and it will exist.
Is it? Yeah, I don't know if I could explain it any better than that. It like Census scans those destinations, and as you might know, like there are applications that are schemaless or schema accepting, or like accepting of all schemas. So there, it's like there's nothing to really point you at except for maybe existing fields that you've already put in those services. There are some that are like half schemaed, so we show that, and then there's something like Salesforce, which is like very strongly typed, and so we'll go scan all of the objects in Salesforce and show you, here are the fields that you can map to. And then we have the data types, so we can show you the warnings that might come from truncation or incompatibility, all the kind of annoying stuff that I was talking about that you just really don't want to think about in your Python script.
Yeah, I've never once thought about them. So.
Right, yeah. It's funny because like that's where a lot of work goes in, and Julie's like, I like this activity thing, which is like, yeah, it totally makes sense. The thing I wanted to say that Claire will like too, I think, is all those transforms that Julie showed, right? Those like last mile SQL transforms on the way out to Customer IO or Salesforce. I'm equally frustrated by having those be in like two places, given that she has code in her DBT project and code in Census. That is like the goal of that is just for Census to be able to execute it on the fly. And so as of later today, like depending on when things go to prod, you'll be able to do that directly off like your DBT repo, which would be very nice.
That's very cool. I had no idea that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That I wanted to try to time it for exactly today.
Oh, wow.
I'm very excited. Yeah. So it's like you'll be able to just like tag models as Census models, and Census will just execute those on the way out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh. News to me. That's really cool. Cool. We are at exactly 2:58, so we'll have another couple of minutes. But just in this last couple of minutes, my coworker Fatima, our events manager, is going to launch a quick poll. There we go. There it is.
Ooh.
pops up just like magic. So yeah, if you can take a moment to just fill that in, that would be very much appreciated. Boris, I have one last question for you.
Sure.
How's the SEO of the term census going?
Terrible.
It's like, I mean, we've got DBT, and you type that in and it's like dialectical behavioral therapy. So I'm like, DBT data, and then I'll get there. But then I type in census data, and I'm
census
like,
data is even worse. Census data is even worse. So I think 2021 will be better. I can only, like, obviously, it's funny because like it's such a perfectly apt word, right? Because our whole point is to help the data team get a single, definition, accounting of all the users and organizations, and then share that with the company, right? Like, so you can see how we landed on this word.
Yeah, an ideological standpoint.
It's very well, it's very well placed. But yeah, not good. And only census data was good. And if anyone wants to submit me funky name ideas, like, just let me know. It'll only drive me insane, but I'm all
well, as obviously as obvious from our naming of products, our naming isn't great either. So
Claire, I think F and T are clear, right? Like Fivetran, Fishtown, like maybe all the data companies should kind of settle on those initials somehow.
Maybe. Consensus. Oh, that is good. It's like not too far as well. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Thanks for the question.